The 6th edition TCO is here for the BCBA exam. My name's Nick. We're going to go over all the differences between the 5th edition and the 6th edition so you are prepared for your test. Let's get into it. All right, the biggest difference between the 5th and the 6th edition exams is how they balance the questions. So over here on the left, I've got the 5th edition, and over here on the right, I've got the 6th edition. So let's go take a look. First of all, with Section A, it looks like they did add a couple more questions, so 2 more questions on there. Still not very significant. A is going to be one of the smaller sections, so don't worry too much about A. The biggest changes here are actually with sections B and G. So notice on the 5th edition exam that there were 32 questions for B and 35 questions for G. Now, if we look over to the 6th edition, they reduced the section B from 32 questions down to 24 questions. And from section G, they reduced it from 35 down to 25. Now, what they did is that they distributed those questions across more of the applied sections. So you'll see ethics went up from 18 to 22. Behavior assessments went from 18 to 23. H went up from 16 to 20, and I went up from 17 to 19. So essentially, all they really did here was take away from the concepts and behavior change procedures, which are more about those basics, and they moved it over to the applied sections. And that was really the biggest change that they made for the 6th edition. Another big difference that I still am not going to get used to is that it's no longer called a task list. It's called a test content outline now. So TCO instead of task list. It's going to take a while to adjust from that, but we'll get over it. Other than a couple little verbiage changes, Section A remained pretty much unchanged, so don't worry too much about any differences there if you were studying the 5th edition. One big theme change from the 5th to the 6th edition is that they really detailed out a little bit better about what you actually need to know for each of these. So B in the 5th edition was only 15 task list items, and now B in the 6th edition is all the way up to 24 test content outline numbers. This sounds so awkward. Anyway, so really most of this stuff is the same. Most of this material was captured in the 5th edition list. They just broke it apart a little bit better. Let's go through a couple examples of how they did that. So on the old task list, it just said differentiate between the positive and negative reinforcement and punishment procedures, but they broke that down into 2 items here. So pretty much the same stuff. For our schedules of reinforcement, what's really nice is that they broke this down into 2 different items. So they said the simple schedules, and instead of just assuming that we need to know all of the compound schedules of reinforcement, they narrowed it down to just the ones that you need in this item B10 here. So it's just the concurrent, multiple, mixed, and chain schedules of reinforcement. So you don't need to know tandem, alternative, or conjunctive anymore, which is great because we never really use those anyway. As far as items that are unique to the 6th edition TCO, it's going to all occur in the ending items here. So this is going to be items B20 to B24. So let's go ahead and look at those. The first one is identify the role of multiple control and behavior. So this is looking at multiple variables that can influence verbal behavior. And it makes sense because a lot of verbal behavior isn't a single operand. It usually has multiple operands in any given response that you look at. So good item. I thumbs up for that change. Next one here is identify examples of processes that promote emergent relations and generative performance. So this is really cool. It kind of relates to the shift in our understanding of verbal behavior and that bigger leaning towards RFT, relational frame theory, and looking at how new behavior can be developed from old behavior. So also thumbs up for this change. B22 is also a new one, so it's identify ways behavioral momentum can be used to understand response persistence. Kind of interesting. I mean, I think behavioral momentum is actually kind of a controversial subject still, but it has shown to work. So I like medium to kind of thumbs up for this one. Let's look at this next one. Identify ways that matching law can be used to interpret response allocation. I love this one. I'm a total matching law geek, so I think it's really great that they included this one on here. And then lastly, we have identify and distinguish between imitation and observational learning. So this was also a brand new addition to the 6th edition, but honestly, most people should have been tuned into this already, but it's cool that they added it on a little bit more explicitly. Moving on to section C, there wasn't a ton of change on this one, but let's go over and highlight what did change. First off, they did eliminate C5 from the old task list. So that was measure form and strength of behavior. So looking at topography and magnitude. I'm kind of glad they got rid of this one because measuring magnitude is kind of really weird and we don't really do it that often. So I'm glad it's not as necessary for the exam anymore. They did flesh out a couple more things in here. So they put a couple more that talk about distinguish between continuous and discontinuous measurements, but you should have been doing that already. And that was about it on this side over here. Let's go ahead and look at the rest of this. These are pretty much all the same. C12 is actually a new one. So this one says select a measurement procedure to obtain representative procedural integrity that accounts for relevant dimensions and environmental constraints. So I think this is good. Again, I think it's something you should have been doing beforehand anyway. You should be able to identify and design procedural integrity procedures, but it's cool that they explicitly put that in here a little bit more clearly into section C. Oh, I forgot to mention one more change that they did do is that they changed up C7 a little bit. So the old one just used to say use trials to criterion, and now this is saying measure efficiency. So it's saying to do that in a couple different ways instead of just trials to criterion. So small little change there. Overall, section C, not a ton of big differences, but I would be keen on this new one, C12. Let's look at section D. Similar to section C, there's just a couple minor changes here and they cleared a few things up. So let's go ahead and take a look at those. D3 is actually a brand new item. So they used to just have D2, which is distinguished between internal and external validity. D3 is actually looking at threats to internal validity. I think this was kind of assumed beforehand, but it's, again, a little bit more clarity on the TCO this time around. D5 also got a little bit of a change. So it used to just say like say why single subject designs are better than group designs, but now it's saying, and I think it's a really good change, to identify the strengths of both single subject and group designs, because behavior analysts have that kind of like superiority problem where like our way is better, but like group designs have their purpose and they're very useful. So I'm glad they put this in here. D6 is also a new one, critique and interpret data from single case experimental designs. So again, I feel like this was assumed beforehand, but if you're doing the design, you should be able to interpret like the data behind it too. That's cool. And then D9 is also new, but I think it was kind of assumed beforehand, is not only should you know these designs, but you should be able to apply them as well. And I know that's not what you want to hear, but we've got some good videos on the channel for that, so make sure to check those out if you suck at experimental design. Ethics. So this section got the biggest overhaul on the 6th edition. So on the previous task list, they just identified the 10 different sections of the ethics code. And it's like, know this. Okay. Well, in this one, they actually more clearly outlined what you should be actually doing. Most of this fell under the ethics code anyway, so if you're familiar with the ethics code, it's not a whole lot new here, but it is a little bit more clear on what you should study and what you should know. So we're not going to go through all of these. I think the first couple of these are pretty basic, like know the ethics code, know why ethics are good is E2 essentially. Maintaining competence, pretty straightforward. So yeah, we'll skip through some of these. The biggest difference here is that some of these later items, so we're looking at E9, 10, and 11, are really focused on building that culture and cultural humility. So let's check these out. E9, engage in cultural humility in service delivery and professional relationships. So I think it's really important. Again, behavior analysts have like this pompous problem. So practicing humility and having it more into our code and our tests, I think is a good thing. E10, apply culturally responsive and inclusive service and supervision activities. I think, again, is another really important one that that should be included here. So as behavior analysts, like, we're oftentimes working with families of all different cultures because autism doesn't affect any particular culture very specifically. So no matter like who you are, you're going to be working with somebody who has different cultural values than you, and you should be able to identify those and incorporate them into your services. And then E11 here, again, is also pretty important. Identify personal biases and how they might interfere with professional activity. So again, like, we're all biased. Everybody's biased. There's no avoiding it. And it's important to kind of have this a little bit more clearly laid out here. So if you are like really worried about the difference between 5th and 6th edition, I would spend a lot of time on ethics. Again, if we went back to our question balance as well, ethics did get a lot more questions than it had on the 5th edition. So this is definitely an area where you want to brush up a little bit harder on if you are here taking the 6th edition exam now. Section F, assessment, had a few changes. Overall, the 5th edition had a lot of emphasis on the functional behavior assessment, and it looks like they took away some of that into this one. And instead, what they did is they put a little bit more into like skills assessment and also like being culturally receptive or responsive in your skills assessments as well. So let's go look at some of these changes. F2 is a new one, so identify and integrate relevant cultural variables in the assessment process. So I think it's another good one to kind of keep an eye on. And kind of a big theme of the 6th edition is that cultural responsiveness. So keep that in play when you are thinking about the 6th edition exam. F8 is also on that same kind of track too. So it says interpret assessment data to identify and prioritize socially significant, client-informed, and culturally responsive behavior change procedures and goals. So again, really looking at the family and their culture and working in like how you're writing your goals in that respect as well. Yeah, that's pretty much it for the differences. Again, they took a little bit out for FBA stuff, but they did kind of capture it in here as well with F5 and F6 still. So it's not like it's completely gone. You should still know your FBA process. I mean, pretty important skill as a behavior analyst. But yeah, overall, like not too different here. Just really focus on more emphasis on the skills assessments and looking at that cultural responsiveness with that as well. All right, on to section G. A couple changes here. So there were a few items that they eliminated. So they took out G11 from the 5th edition, which was use Skinner's analysis to teach verbal behavior. I think it's kind of weird they took this one out. I mean, like, I feel like teaching verbal behavior is a pretty crucial skill as a BCBA, but I don't know. That's just me. They also took out use equivalence-based instruction. They changed that into G19 a little bit here. So this one is design and evaluate procedures to promote emergent relations and generative performance. So I like this because it's a little bit more broad than just using stimulus equivalence, because if you are familiar with relational frame theory and how different relationships can emerge, you'll know that this kind of captures that and shows a little bit more as well. And they also took out G20, which was use self-management strategies. I also find that kind of weird. I feel like a lot of people can benefit from self-management strategies, so I think it's interesting that they took that off here. Let's go through and go through a couple of the other changes. Most of these were just wording tweaks, but there were a couple other important things to look at. G2, I think, is really the big one here. So this is looking at our differential reinforcement procedures, and I really actually like this change. They say that they want you to do it with and without extinction. So they're actually listening to the research. DRA without extinction is shown to be a lot better in most circumstances. I really like that they included that one here. Let's keep going here. I really don't think there was a whole lot of other significant changes here. Oh, another thing that was interesting is that they had, instead of using discrete trial and naturalistic procedures, they kind of just narrowed this into trial-based and free operand procedures. I like this as well because discrete trial is a little bit outdated, and I think trial-based and free operand kind of captures it all as necessary. And it also shows that like trial-based can happen in more naturalistic settings too. It doesn't just need to be like at a table, we're drilling trials. So I kind of like that they made this one a little bit more flexible here as well. Other than that, nothing else is really too crazy. Again, they just fleshed out a lot of things here, so it's a little bit more clear about what you actually need to know. Oh yeah, G18 is also a new one. So this one is evaluate emotional and elicited effects of behavior change procedures. Also, big thumbs up for this one because, yeah, sometimes our procedures will make our kids cry a lot, and that's not as cool. So I like that they put that, we should actually consider that. So great change. All right, Section H, intervention, actually did not get a whole lot of changes here, but let's go ahead and highlight the changes that did occur. The biggest one was with H2. So this one says identify and recommend interventions based on assessment results, scientific evidence, client preferences, and contextual fit. I kind of like this one. They gave some examples here, so including expertise required for implementation. So really important to consider, especially when you're doing like parents or training parents to do an intervention, or if you're working with newer RBTs. Cultural variables, again, big theme in the new 6th edition here is looking at those cultural variables and environmental resources. So this was already on the old one. So they just kind of like tweaked this one a little bit. So not crazily different, but I like the changes that they made in this one overall. Another big change was this addition for H5. So plan for an attempt to mitigate possible relapse of the target behavior. So cool one here. I think it does fall into like the maintenance of our behavior change procedures as well. But I think it's cool to like give us some foresight, like, hey, we should be thinking about this beforehand and let's prevent it early on. So cool that they added that a little bit more explicitly. Everything else was kind of just like minor tweaks and verbiage. So I wouldn't worry too much about other changes on Section H. All right, last section here, Section I, we're looking at supervision. This one also did not get a whole lot of change here, but let's look at the differences. I think the biggest change here is with I2, so identify and apply strategies for establishing effective supervisory relationships. I like the put like a little bit more details and examples on this one, so that's really cool. This is definitely a little bit more fleshed out than the old task list. Looking at I3, this is also a new one. So identify and implement methods that promote equity in supervision practices. So I think this is really neat because we tend to get biased. We always have like our favorite supervisee or our favorite RBT. So I think it's cool to actually like put the scope in on that and like, hey, how can we like equalize these things a little bit better? Another thing with I4, they did include select supervision goals based on assessment. That was in the old one, but they also included in this one, what do you know, cultural variables. That's the theme of the 6th edition here. So they included that with our supervision goals as well. So that is a good change. And they added this into I5 as well. So identify and apply empirically validated and culturally responsive performance management procedures. So again, looking at the cultural biases that you have and how they relate to your supervisees as well. So I think overall good changes here. Other than that, nothing else was really changed too crazily here. So the number one question that I've been getting asked recently is, can you use 5th edition materials to study for the 6th edition exam? And like, yeah, I mean, like the concepts like reinforcement and discrimination and supervision, like these haven't really changed a whole lot from the 5th to the 6th edition. So like 95% of the material is going to be applicable still if you're using 5th edition study material. So I wouldn't really worry about that too much. There are a couple things that you might be missing, but we just identified them on this task list, or sorry, this test content outline, our TCO. So now that you're oriented to those, that you can make sure to go study those more explicitly too. But luckily, everything at Understanding Behavior is geared for the 6th edition test. So go ahead and check out our products if you're interested in getting some really high quality mock exams at an affordable price. We also have the Understanding Behavior app is live now. You can access 2 free mini mocks and 3 free fluency quizzes on the app absolutely for free. It's on both iOS and on Android. So no matter what kind of device you have, you'll be able to access it. Really cool stuff. I think you should check it out. Anyway, my name's Nick, and hopefully you enjoyed this little breakdown of the differences between the 5th and the 6th edition. From student reports, I've been looking around on Facebook and people talking about the exam a little bit. People are saying like, yeah, the exam really isn't that much different. It's about the same. Really the question balance is just a little bit different. People are noticing that a little bit extra emphasis on ethics and a little bit more emphasis on the applied side of things. I've heard some people say that there's a little bit more like OBM stuff too, but I think it's really just looking more at supervision. And again, there were a couple more supervision questions added in. So other than that, like, it's pretty much the same content. Don't worry about it too much. Look at those new things. Again, it's just a couple of things, but most of it you should have been studying already and learning in your program and your supervision experience already. So nothing should be like too shocker, like, oh my God, I've never heard this term before. It should be pretty familiar if you've been studying for the 5th edition and have went to grad school recently. Anyway, that's all for this video. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.